to chair this session.
So good afternoon, everybody, and thanks to all the speakers in the first part of today's event, the soft launch of the Centre for Irish Towns, and I'll be your host for the second part, which is the first of our Talking Towns seminars. My name is Katrina Devery. I'm the Research Manager at the Art Institute in UCD, and we're delighted to be co-hosting this new seminar series with the Centre for Irish Towns. So this is the first seminar. We'll take a break for the summer, and then the series will resume in September on a monthly basis. More details, if you want to find out and you want to attend, that we'll circulate more details via the new CfIT website that's been shared in the chat, where you can sign up to receive updates as well there. We'll also put on the Art Institute website in our weekly email, and you can obviously follow CfIT on Twitter, and the handle is UCD CfIT. And I think we're going to set up a new hashtag for the Talking Towns seminar series. So if you want to tweet about it, we hopefully will use it for the series. It'll be hashtag Talking Towns. So just in terms of the overall purpose of the Talking Towns seminars, it's really to start a conversation around towns, to raise awareness of who's doing what in and beyond UCD in Ireland on towns, and to build a community really of people who are working to make Irish towns better. So the seminars will be an hour long. Each will be around a specific theme. Each one will have 3 speakers, 3 presentations from researchers talking about different aspects of their research related to towns, and the aim is to bring in student research into each session as well. So today we have 3 presentations from Orla Murphy, Gary Hamilton and Karen Keaveney. Each person will speak for 10 to 15 minutes, and we'll take all the questions at the end. So if you have a question, just put it in the chat or hold on, and you can maybe put your name in the chat at the end and even ask it yourself if you want to. So the sort of focus for today is about the connection between towns and policy at the local, national and international scale or level. So first up, I'll hand back over to CfIT co-director Orla Murphy, who's part-time assistant professor in the School of Architecture, Planning and Environmental Policy here in UCD. Orla is going to talk about the new European Bauhaus and its potential to connect with rural towns. So over to you, Orla.
Thanks, Katrina. Just share my screen. Is that share? Hang on a second. I'm not sure if you can you see those slides, Katrina?
Yeah, we can see those, yeah. But just it's in speaker view where you need to go to.
Yeah, okay. So thank you very much, Katrina, for the introduction. And as you mentioned, we're starting with the kind of the outward scale, the kind of macro scale of European policy and its impact on towns. So I'm just going to speak for about 10 minutes about the new European Bauhaus. I'm sure most of you are familiar with it already, but just in case anybody isn't, I'm going to give you a little bit of background to what it is and what it might mean for towns in Ireland. So I suppose to describe it, the new European Bauhaus is an environmental, economic and cultural project, and it aims to combine design with 3 core guides or values, which are sustainability, beauty and inclusion, in order to help deliver the European Green Deal and to decarbonise Europe by 2050. It was announced by the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen in her 2020 State of the Union address, and she said, "The new European Bauhaus is a project of hope to explore how we live better together after the pandemic. It's about matching sustainability with style to bring the European Green Deal closer to people's minds and homes. We need all creative minds, designers, artists, scientists, architects and citizens to make the new European Bauhaus a success." The core values of the new European Bauhaus are sustainability, aesthetics and inclusiveness or inclusion. And there are 3 phases to the initiative, the first of which is called the co-design phase, and that launched in January 21, and it runs until the end of this month. And the goal of the design phase is to use a co-creation process to shape the concept and the initiative a little bit by exploring ideas, identifying the most urgent needs and challenges, and to connect interested parties. So it's just important to mention that you can still submit ideas to the co-design phase of the new European Bauhaus until June the 30th. You can do that via their website. There's a dedicated co-design page there. And also, as one element of the design phase, the Commission launched the first edition of the new European Bauhaus Prize, and the shortlisted prize projects are currently open for public voting, and it's lovely to see some Irish examples there. You can also go onto the co-design section of the website and see where submissions have come from. I think there's over 500 up on the website, but you can search by country, so it's really nice to start to see particularly Irish examples. Please do continue to contribute to the co-design phase. As I said, it is shaping the initiative. So it's important to, I think, make any submissions that you feel are of value. The second delivery phase then is, will begin with the opening of calls for proposals starting from autumn this year. And so it's going to be the first of many calls, but the first one's going to look for 5 pilot projects in EU member states through the use of EU funds at national and regional level. So my understanding is that's going to be connected with Horizon Europe. And the hope is then that the learning from these pilots will then be disseminated in the third phase and shared to spread the ideas and the concepts, further defining the new European Bauhaus via the projects, disseminating knowledge learned from those initial projects, networking, and building up capacity in Europe and beyond. The initiative is supported by 2 of the European commissioners, Maria Gabriel, who's Commissioner for Innovation, Research, Culture, Education and Youth, and she's highlighted the potential for the new European Bauhaus to link the technical aspects of decarbonisation with design and culture on the other hand, in what is, I think, a recognition that in order to deliver the ambitious targets set out, both behavioural and system change is needed. And then Commissioner for Cohesion and Reforms, Elisa Ferreira, has pointed out that without bringing everybody along, without tangible supports for social cohesion and co-creation of the process of decarbonisation, the challenge is really just too hard. There are a couple of novel aspects, I think, to the new European Bauhaus that make it distinctive. Firstly, it explicitly calls for the need for design to help to shape a sustainable, inclusive and beautiful decarbonised Europe, acknowledging that while rules and regulation related to each of the objectives of the EU Green Deal are going to be required, they on their own will not be sufficient to ensure either the pace of decarbonisation or the quality of the world that's going to be shaped by this transition. So the EU Green Deal is now one of the main driving objectives of the EU, and the policies needed to deliver it are embedded in all of the areas. This is a kind of a tree showing the vast range of policies and strategies that are linked to the EU Green Deal. The new European Bauhaus, which is down here, the sort of bottom left, I think it's in a kind of a strange place there. And I would actually say it's probably a better place as something that cross-cuts and connects with nearly all of the other strategies, because it can help, I think, to shape what the EU Green Deal is actually going to look like. And it has the potential, as I said, to cut across the other agendas that perhaps are sometimes slightly siloed and that might not be connected together otherwise. Secondly, the use of co-design to continue to shape the initiative at the scale of a continent, 450 million people, is really exciting. And it demonstrates the realization that mass system and behavioural change is not going to happen solely through top-down regulation. You can see the beginnings of the analysis of co-design input so far, as I mentioned, on the New European Bauhaus website. And it is heartening to see the shortlisted entries for the new European Bauhaus Prize, including entries from Ireland. There's over 2,000 entries to this first series of prizes. And really the range of breadth of innovation, particularly at grassroots level, is, I think, both surprising and very hopeful. I'm proud to have been selected as one of 18 members of the high-level roundtable of the new European Bauhaus and an ambassador for the initiative. I suppose just to say that we're not a formal expert or advisory group of the Commission, and we don't decide on any funding linked to the project. Our role is more to feed into the co-design of the initiative with colleagues who have very different perspectives, and to inspire the project from those varied ranges of experience. We want to explore new ways of living together, considering key developments across various areas, including creativity, technology, urbanism, social dimensions, that different members of the high-level roundtable represent. So we give ideas and we enlarge the horizon for this work and act as ambassadors for the initiative and a bridge between our communities and the new European Bauhaus team in the JRC. So we're currently drafting what we call a concept paper that's going to be part of the co-design process. So what relevance does this initiative have for towns in Ireland? Surely it's far too out there or large in scale. Well, I think by way of example, if you look at Ireland, and particularly in terms of increasing car dependency over the last 50 years, that has caused a chain of connected negative impacts. So we see poorly planned peripheral low density settlement patterns that have led to town centre vacancy, to underperforming infrastructure networks and to degraded public space. There are over 200,000 empty houses in Ireland and over 1 million homes that require energy upgrade. From that, you get air pollution, traffic congestion, long commutes to work and school, that flows into health, having an impact on obesity and associated health problems, along with isolation of elderly and vulnerable people due to a lack of public transport, and all with a very high carbon dependency on individual fossil fuel-based transport. I think this article and photograph, which was from the Irish Times last weekend, describes the impact of many of these issues. You can see the degraded urban realm is completely dominated by cars and car parking. The public realm is poorly designed, and it makes the centre of the town unattractive as a place to meet or live or do business. This photo shows one of 30 protests held in rural towns across the country as farmers protested to the new CAP reforms, stating that the impact on towns would be significant. And they explicitly said, the IFA said the objective to the protest was to emphasize the importance of agriculture in rural towns. So this position demonstrates the cross-cutting nature of rural and urban conditions, and also the impact that decarbonisation will have on certain people's lives, and hence the urgent need for that change to be co-created and not imposed from above. This reality is one of the main drivers, I think, of the new European Bauhaus, which describes a co-created, people-led and design-informed approach. And it's clear that we need to listen to the stories and experience of people to effect positive societal and behavioural change by design. And the acknowledgement that good design can and must improve the lives of everyone in such a way that makes intelligent, effective use of existing resources. Adaptive reuse and energy upgrade of existing buildings, reprioritisation of public spaces for people before cars, improving biodiversity and access to nature in urban areas to make cities and towns healthy, resilient, and great places to live, work and play in an inclusively designed way is going to be key. Land use policy needs to take into account a just transition so that those who work to produce our food and to steward the land are involved in the conversation. We need to become a radically inclusive society and shift from an economy of growth to a circular economy of belonging. So imagine this street, instead of being choked by cars, as being a livable and walkable neighbourhood renovated to become net positive energy while embracing its cultural distinctiveness. Imagine the future for Irish towns that attract people of all ages, abilities and diversity to live good quality, socially connected lives in places that are beautiful, sustainable and that value their stories. If we look again at the EU Green Deal objectives alongside the UCD CfIT research themes, which Philip outlined earlier, it allows us to see where possible overlaps lie. And if we then apply a filter of the new European Bauhaus themes of sustainability, beauty and inclusion, you can see how the EU Green Deal objectives connect in a very clear and tangible ways with particular UCD CfIT research themes that our colleagues have identified. It is a fact, I think, that the EU Green Deal as a primary mechanism for decarbonising the EU is going to have an impact on all of our lives. The new European Bauhaus offers us an opportunity to play a role in this change, to co-create it and to ensure that it's suited to the culture, identity, diversity and future that we want to design for Ireland. And as I hope I've shown today, I think that very much includes our towns. Thank you. Katrina.
Thanks very much, Orla. So next up we have Gary Hamilton, and Gary is one of 50 students in the 2021 Masters in Architecture course in the School of Architecture, Planning and Environmental Policy. And Gary will be presenting about his thesis project, which looks at remote working and adaptive reuse in the town of Ramelton, County Donegal. So over to you, Gary.
Hi, everyone. How's it going? Thanks very much for that introduction, Katrina. And I might just share my screen now for a moment. So yeah.
Perfect. That's it. Yeah.
Great, thanks. So yeah, I'm delighted to be speaking with you today about my recent thesis and how it intersects with recent policies and explores possibly what some of them might look like. It's only one option perhaps, but yeah, just delighted to be here, I suppose. So yeah, overall, the thesis is interested in exploring the potential role of remote working infrastructure in the revitalization of rural Irish towns. So I'd been exploring this primarily by interrogating the remote working hub infrastructure and what it is, what it could be, and what it could mean to a particular place. I was interested in the idea of remote work as a catalyst for responsive spatial intervention and how this new hub infrastructure can be a vehicle to engage with the broader social implications associated with remote working in Irish towns. So for a bit of background, and as I'm sure most of you are already aware, the government has recently identified these hubs as a form of national infrastructure. And they've signalled an intention to fund and assist with their implementation across the island. So as it stands, there are about 300 of them, and there's an intention to increase this number to around 400 in the coming years. So in this context, these infrastructures are positioned to become a significant feature in the urban fabric of towns in the future. And so with the scale and rhetoric that surrounds these hubs, it becomes necessary to question how exactly they're being spatialized. Where are they situated? What do they do exactly? What are they made of? And do they need to be built new, or could they inhabit existing structures? So having observed existing hubs, there seems to be a gap between the rhetoric surrounding them and their execution. So in the existing model, they're generally located on the periphery of towns in industrial estates and demonstrate little to no engagement with their surrounding context. Having reflected on what distinguished these hubs from regular commercial offices, I resolved that this infrastructure is ultimately being implemented for social reasons and a response to social needs associated with worker isolation and rural regeneration. Therefore, the thesis is interested in the affordances of the typology as an opportunity, as a socially responsive civic community that goes beyond just facilitating remote work to contribute to the wider social life of the places they inhabit, becoming a vibrant community that is both in and of place. So in terms of place, I've been using a situated case study in County Donegal as a vehicle to explore and test these ideas. And being from there myself, I felt that the infrastructure could play a significant role in the future development of the county. Located in the northwest of Ireland, Donegal is essentially divided from the Republic by the presence of the Irish border, and it was one of the few counties to suffer a population decrease in the last census in 2016, as its isolation has presented various social and economic difficulties. In response to this, there's been a recent effort to reconnect the county through digital infrastructure in a bid to attract people to stay, live, and work there. The county consists largely of smaller towns with populations under 2,000 that are supplemented by larger urban centres, with the largest being Letterkenny. I felt that the hub infrastructure would have the most meaningful impact in these smaller towns, and so I chose to test the thesis in the town of Ramelton, which is highlighted here in orange. Situated along the River Lennon that flows into Lough Swilly, Ramelton historically played a vital role in Donegal's linen industry. It was the main port for the export of linens from the northwest and is said to have exported goods as far as New York and Jamaica. The industry in Ramelton began to decline in the mid-19th century between the silting of the river and the arrival of a railway in Letterkenny. These factors essentially isolated the town and resulted in most of the town's built fabric falling into dereliction as the town centre gradually moved from the industrial Eastern Quay to the Western Mall. Today, the town is recognised as a scenic heritage town that benefits from its proximity to natural amenities. Although there have been recent efforts to regenerate the town, this process has yet to answer what might become of the derelict industrial buildings at the Eastern Quay. These industrial buildings form an urban block in the town and are characterised by a perimeter of thick stone walls. The block has a dual quality, with industrial buildings on the quayside and more traditional buildings to the street edge. The block currently accommodates a pub, off-licence, cafe, building suppliers, and residences. And this little inlet is known as the Market Square, although it's rarely used as a public space and serves largely as an impromptu car park. The derelict warehouses on the quay also have a representational quality as the kind of hegemonic postcard image of the town. So with this in mind, I wanted to speculate on how the hub infrastructure could be an opportunity to adapt and reframe these buildings as having an evolved meaning in the 21st century that says something about the role of work in towns. where they might become vibrant social amenities that play an active role as part of its future, rather than merely surviving as static objects in a scenographic backdrop. So from here, I developed an initial brief that framed work as a catalyst for social activity. And the brief was a means of challenging some of the preconceptions of what the infrastructure could address. I reimagined the hub as a mixed-use space that fostered social and cultural programs alongside co-working spaces. These included childcare facilities, a job centre, artist studios, a youth centre, an active retirement space, and a multi-purpose gathering hall. I also wanted to open up the definition of remote working as being more than just a desk and a laptop. And so I proposed to incorporate a robust workshop space that offered possibilities beyond just digital work. Having developed a brief, I worked through sketching, collage, and model to try and get a sense of the scale of intervention that would be required and what the kind of atmosphere the spaces might be like. So having initially made a leap into making new spaces within the site, I decided to adopt a more pragmatic approach based on enabling the site and uncovering the project based on existing conditions. So this approach sought to deeply engage with the idea of continuity, where a dialogue between past, present, and future could inform an intervention. So from here, I made a series of short written pieces that reflected on aspects that shaped the experience of the site. These varied from describing the walls as characters to articulating the role signs play in shaping the experience of the place. From here, I developed some underlying principles that would inform my engagement and on a broader scale, how these infrastructures could be rolled out in a way that could enliven existing buildings and sites. I identified 4 key principles of reveal, reuse, enable, and invent. These principles aren't thought of as being mutually exclusive, but each one can be described through specific locations and interventions on the site. So revealing space has to do with how the infrastructure can be a vehicle to accentuate and reveal inherent qualities of spaces that might not necessarily be visible at present. For instance, in Ramelton, the Market Square inlet could be reintegrated for public use by resurfacing its ground texture. Reuse involves making use of readily available existing spaces wherever possible. And in Ramelton, the scale of the central building within the site could readily accommodate a gathering hall, and the space could be enhanced by introducing a new roof structure that allows light to enter into the space. And so enabling involves the addition of supplementary pragmatic elements that are required for the building to function. In Ramelton, due to the level of dereliction in the warehouse on the quay, these elements would primarily include a new roof, vertical circulation, and various services. The final of inventing space involves making new structures to accommodate needs not currently facilitated by the existing sites, and would serve as an opportunity to express the material presence of the overarching national typology. So the thesis project culminated in a proposal that employs the outline principles in a way that accentuates the existing qualities of the site in accommodating the infrastructure. The 3 main structures of warehouse, workshop, and gathering hall have been connected by a new circulation spine that frames the adjacent yard spaces. These yards have been reframed as responsive outdoor rooms of a diverse scale and character that serve as an extension of the townscape and promote the social role of work in the town. The quay yard serves as an extension of the recreational quality of the quay. The yard at Castle Street serves a dual function as both a working yard and a workshop, and an extension of the market square when required. A new intimate courtyard serves as a semi-public space that can also be used as a play yard for the creche. The primary entrances have been relocated into the yards in order to subvert their once insular character and promote activity within and around them. And in terms of making material interventions, the Goldsmiths Gallery by Assemble was observed as a precedent of how materials can reinterpret the existing fabric with modern construction methods. So in Ramelton, I opted to reinterpret the prevalent construction method of a self-supporting stone wall with modern sustainable alternatives, such as perlite insulated clay blocks. These blocks form a monolithic structural wall that serves as an inflection of the existing warehouse. The clay blocks have an aesthetic tactile quality and have been left exposed within the interior to reveal this quality, creating a relationship between the method of construction and the spatial experience. The necessity of a render for the blocks instigated a facade treatment that employs various render finishes to articulate the facade, where these finishes have been painted over along with the existing facade to create a sense of unity between new and old. And these are just some images that give a sense of how the image of the quay has been influenced by the project. And these are some sketches that give a sense of the diversity of rooms and functions on the site. So in general, the spaces themselves were conceived as being relatively open and unspecified so that they can be flexible and robust enough to be adapted into whatever they might need to be in the future. In conclusion, thesis aims to construct a dialogue with regards to the role of public infrastructure, aligning broader social and environmental ambitions with specific architectural considerations through policy, and the evolving role of what it means to live and work in Irish towns. This dialogue advocates for a nuanced and responsive approach to the implementation of these infrastructures, as it seeks to articulate an expanded role where they deeply engage with the affordances of their status as public infrastructure. So the thesis affirms that this infrastructure has the capacity to emerge as a new significant typology within the fabric of Irish towns. And in this context, its spatialization should be both reflective of and responsive to the needs of Irish towns. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Gary. That was great. So our final speaker today is Dr. Karen Keaveney. And Karen is based in the School of Agriculture and Food Science, where she's head of subject for rural development. And Karen will speak about livability, governance, and mapping change in towns in the context of the government's recent Our Rural Futures Rural Development Policy 2021 to 25. So over to you, Karen.
Hi, thanks so much. Thanks, Katrina. That was really interesting as well, the previous talk. I'd love to hear more. Thanks a million. As Philip and Orla said earlier, I'm part of the working group that is setting up the Centre for Irish Towns. And what I wanted to look at today was just a very quick overview of the rurality, and really coming from sort of the rural perspective, looking at kind of urban structure in Ireland, and possibly identifying some of the evidence bases that we can address as we develop the centre. So thanks very much for having me today. So I'm a geographer, a human geographer, and I'm also a qualified regional and urban planner. And I'm based in the School of Agriculture and Food Science. So I think very naturally I work in an interdisciplinary environment. So it's great also to be working beyond that with architecture and various other schools in the university on this. So today I am going to look at rurality in Ireland and its relationships with urban. I want to look a little bit at the geography of towns, and also some of the policy responses to change in both recent decades and also the more recent kind of responses due to COVID. So in reality, rurality in Ireland is based around quite a few elements. It's difficult to summarize in a few minutes, but I would identify them as the idea of what rural is really centered around taken for granted notions of what it is. And also coupling that with a very weak urban structure traditionally, particularly in the Republic of Ireland, and particularly in the west of Ireland, we've never really had a very strong urban structure. It's more a series of settlements as opposed to delineated towns. On top of that, there's a very strong agricultural lobby in Ireland, and that has had a really strong influence on policy for rural places. And it was interesting that Orla had the article from the Irish Times with the protests and with the over CAP. And it does show that strong voice and representation that farming gives to rural areas. But the reality is rural places are far more complex than just farming. Majority of people living in rural areas don't work in agriculture. And so it's really important to start to address who else is living in rural places, what are their needs, and what are the needs for a diversifying economy in rural places. That links very strongly with a legacy of a lack of evidence bases in understanding spatial change in Ireland, and then particularly in this sense for rural areas. And also there's been a really limited focus on towns in the past, and that ties in with those previous points, being that we have quite a weak urban structure in Ireland, and that strong agricultural lobby, which really, I think in the past hasn't looked at towns. Again, that article was really interesting because the protests that have been happening over the last week have been very focused on towns, and it's becoming clear that farming lobby groups are seeing that relationship, and they have to, if they are going to have a voice in the future of rural Ireland, they have to link it with towns. And of course, I have to mention COVID because I think it has had a major influence on how we are perceiving scale and how we're perceiving rural places. And I can really see a change in the last year and a half about how both government and I think people in their day-to-day lives are looking at rural areas. So the COVID-19 crisis has highlighted the vulnerabilities of rural areas, which have been particularly exposed because they have, among other things, a much less diversified economy than urban places, a higher share of workers in essential jobs such as agriculture and food processing, and that's coupled with a limited capability to undertake these jobs from homes, which can make teleworking a challenge. There's poorer access to services and a large digital divide with lower accessibility to the internet. For Ireland, a centre of vulnerability in the rural population is the higher proportion of older people living in rural places, coupled with the lack of access to services and proximity to specialised care. And that has been particularly highlighted in the last year, year and a half, although it's something we've been very aware of for quite some time. And it's important to highlight those because it is influencing where policy is going in Ireland in particular at the moment. So I am a geographer and I have to have some maps. So I just want to talk a little bit about the geography of towns. So from a settlement point of view, we have a series of urban settlements. The red areas here mark all settlements that are considered to be towns or cities on the island of Ireland. And I was talking about that weak urban structure, and you'll see even in Northern Ireland, there's a much more tighter structure for towns, whereas in the Republic, and particularly as you go to the northwest and west, it sort of becomes much more scattered, much weaker kind of structure there. In terms of size of towns, something kind of we're familiar, again, there's that east-west divide. Larger towns and cities tend to be on the east coast, and again, weaker, kind of what Gary was talking about, looking at Donegal, a much weaker urban structure in the west and northwest. And we really became acutely aware of towns and their proximity and our access when we had our series of radius, 2 kilometre, 5 kilometre radius imposed restrictions over the last year and a half. And so it's interesting to kind of identify, actually, if you look at the 2K1, you can see a really small space around the towns and access to it. And again, you know, really challenging to kind of see the accessibility to towns and our services once you move out of this bigger urban centres. So I just want to look a little bit at population change in the rural setting. This map is showing a 25-year period from 1991 to 2016, based on that's the most recent census data that we have. And overall, there has been a 35% national population increase in that period. And in rural areas, it's been pretty decent as well. But this map highlights in some of the blue areas here, which you can see, these are where there has been decline. And again, it ties in with that weaker urban structure to the sort of east-west divide. But interestingly, in that 25 period, when you exclude County Dublin and then the other cities, there's actually been a 50% increase in the number of people living in towns and a 45% increase in those living in peri-urban areas. So there is there has been a major convergence since the 90s of rural populations going towards towns and the sort of peri-urban adjacent rural areas. What's interesting about that is it's not necessarily a policy-led thing. It is about people choosing access to housing, access to services, access to employment, of course. This is just an actual population map. And again, that just kind of reiterates what I was saying there about the population really getting close to sort of the urban centres, obviously the cities, Galway's there, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but also in and around the towns. Interestingly though, this is from a study I did with some colleagues for NESC late last year. We were looking at the vitality ratio for rural areas, and that looks at the dependency ratio between younger populations and older populations. The blue areas in this map show an increased dependency ratio, so an older population. But the pink areas actually show increased vitality. That very strongly connects with those earlier maps with the towns. It's the younger populations moving out towards the smaller sort of urban centres to actually work and live. Now, possibly there's commuting aspects there, and people have moved out because it's the only place they can afford to live in. But it's really interesting possibly for the future, because we're seeing greater vitality levels when you look at population ratios in the sort of medium to smaller sized towns. So, policy responses. Pre-COVID, we had, of course, the National Planning Framework, and that is obviously still really overseeing all our national and regional development. And that policy identifies rural areas as making a major contribution to Ireland's identity and to overall national development in economic, social and cultural and environmental terms. And the focus of the NPF is to strengthen rural fabric, supporting communities that live there, planning for future growth and developing rural areas addressing decline. And in particular, that was identified having a particular focus on the renewal and development of towns and villages. Also addressing connectivity gaps and looking at the coordination of existing investment programs. This also ties importantly in with sort of approaches, particularly from the OECD, that really look at policy approaches that are based not on subsidies and protection, but really supporting communities to address challenges and opportunities in their areas. And that really is about taking a sustainable development approach across economic, social and environmental issues, identifying that there are different types of rural areas, that we don't have a simple rural dichotomy. Those maps alone highlight that we have different types of rural territories. And then finally, that all stakeholders should be involved in the decision-making around rural places. So not just government, but also private sector and civil society. Our most recent policy on for rural areas has been our Rural Future, which just came out earlier this year. Now, interestingly, the department were developing this pre-COVID, but definitely with remote working policies and other policies coming into play, that policy has been adopted or adapted to look at what we have learned from the COVID era. It is a policy that, while it's developed by the Department of Rural Community Development, it is genuinely trying to be holistically rural, going across departments. There's a strong focus in that policy on remote working, on revitalising towns, and on rural living. However, we do have to be mindful that governance is a major issue for towns. The Local Government Act of 2014 had a significant impact on decision making for towns, and despite current focus on towns, the removal of the town councils through that act has really broken our decision making in one sense. It has disrupted it, and really that needs to be looked at, and it's something hopefully in the Centre for Irish Towns we'll be examining. And really that ties in with the need for really strong evidence bases to inform decision making. And you can still see, lots of challenges there in terms of, while we now have our Rural Future, and there is this idea, anecdotally at least, that urban dwellers are flocking to the countryside, there are structural challenges that come with that, such as what kind of jobs will actually be in rural places. Is remote working a silver bullet? I would say no. It has to be part of a suite to address issues in rural areas. And positively, There is some research starting on this. Just for example, with colleagues in Maynooth University, I've just started a project called In Place, which is jointly funded by the Local Government Management Agency and the Department for Housing. And we're going to be looking at this to see the impact of COVID on commuting towns and potential changes that are taking place as a result of more people moving out to the countryside, or at least working from home. Towns really are adaptive, but there are a lot of challenges for them. We've seen some really positive things emerge from the COVID era, where businesses, for example, are really adapting to change, possibly changing the way they do business. But there's been tensions maybe around things like holiday homes. I remember last Easter, I think 12 months, where there was a lot of tension about various car regs appearing in different parts of the country. So we do still have challenges about access to the countryside and affordability as well. And finally, on a positive note, our Rural Future, the new policy, really does tie in, and I think really recognises the interdependencies between urban and rural areas. And that's something that's really, I think, central for the establishment of the Centre of Irish Towns. And I think much of what we want to do in the Centre is looking at this vision for a thriving rural Ireland and the role for towns in national economic, social, cultural and environmental well-being and development. And really looking at towns as places to live and work and as engines of growth for their areas. So thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Karen, and thanks to all of our speakers. That were really 3 very interesting presentations.